Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Getting back to work on getting the engine out of the MR2. So I'm just continuing to disconnect and take things apart. One thing I did do that I didn't show or mention yesterday was the purge canister. After doing some research, I am going to be keeping this in the car, so I did disconnect this one line from it so that this all goes to the intake manifold of the 3S, so that will that'll go with the engine, but I am keeping the purge solenoid, or purge canister, so new owner will just have to reuse theirs. So what I'm going to do is I need to go inside and work on taking out the boost control and all the wiring for that. Still need to disconnect the shift cables, clutch slave cylinder, pull the axles out, and then we should be and then it's, the rear suspension, and we should be getting pretty close to being able to drop this thing. So that's where I'm at now. I'm probably gonna go inside the interior and start getting the boost control system out of here. All right, I tore the dash apart and disconnected the boost controller. It's now missing from the pod. Snipped the wires that needed to be snipped and pulled through the wires that go with the engine, so that's all been undone. Pulled them through the plug there, and they are now pulled out and resting on top of the engine there. Those are the connectors for the boost control solenoid, as well as the map sensor that go to the SCG1. And then the SCG1 itself is pulled out over here with the wiring and the extension wire for the O2 sensor and the instructions. All right, next day, I've been working on the right rear suspension, trying to get things loosened up and get the half shaft out. So what I ended up doing is I disconnected the rear tie rod from the subframe, disconnected the rear control arm from the subframe, unbolted the 2 bolts that hold the control arm ball joint to the bottom of the spindle. That got me some play. And as far as the axle on this side goes, because it's a pain in the ass to try and get it out with it all as one piece, plus both these axles are leaking at the CV joint. There's, they're wet and signs of grease, so I figured I'd rebuild them. I ended up unbolting the 6 bolts here and just pulling out this end of it. I'll drop the engine with that part still in the transmission attached to the engine, and once it's on the ground, I can go ahead and remove the remaining part of the passenger side axle, because I know that tends to be a pain. As far as the driver's side goes, I haven't gotten to that yet. I will probably just loosen the 6 bolts while it's in there, because it'll just make it easier versus trying to do it on a bench, and then go ahead and remove it just by popping it out of the axles. So that's where I'm at right now. That will be next on the list, will be the driver's side rear axle and messing around with disassembling the rear suspension. All right, and here we are on the driver's side. As you can see, the half shaft is removed. Again, loosened and removed the inboard bolt for the lower control arm, and got the tie rod removed from the rear cross member, so everything is done on this side. I did remove the sway bar links as well on both sides, so everything suspension wise is unbolted from the cross member that needs to be removed. So basically where we're at right now is I just need to disconnect some of the cooling lines, fuel line, a few little things that were still attached, and then it's pretty much going to be setting up the body to start pulling the motor. Probably remove the trunk lid to make sure that that doesn't get damaged by the cherry picker, and then setting the rear end up high enough so I can get everything out from underneath. All right, so I went ahead and I removed the trunk lid. You can see some rags there that I was using just to kind of put underneath it so I wouldn't scratch the fresh paint. I also had some towels on the corners and one covering the latch there that you can see wadded up in the trunk. But either way, trunk lid is now out of the way. So basically, yeah, I'm at the point now where I just have a few hoses to disconnect as far as coolant lines, both the heater core lines, the in and out of the main coolant lines. 2 AC lines, I need to loosen those, disconnect those, and I need to disconnect the fuel line, and then it's really loosening the mounts up, getting those ready to remove, and getting this thing positioned. I took a quick measurement. From what I've been able to tell, you need about 30 inches of clearance. Right now where it sits, I've got 24 inches. What I'm thinking I can do is drop the front down because it's pretty high up, as you can see. Lower the front end, and then I can probably get some blocks underneath these 2 rear jack stands and get this thing higher in the air, get the additional 6 inches I need to clear the black grill here, and that should be enough to roll this out. I do, like I said, have a dolly that I'm going to put everything on and just roll it out on the dolly once I get it dropped. So probably going to end just work on it for now. I have some other stuff due tonight. It's currently Wednesday. I have stuff going on the next 2 days. So next I'll be working on this is Saturday, which is the day that I have to get everything out, because the new owner of this engine will be picking it up on Sunday. So I don't think there's too much, waiting for me. It looks like we're in a pretty good spot right now. So yeah, I think I'll be able to get everything done, knocked out on Saturday, get it all pulled out, get the transmission pulled off the engine for him, and be good to go. So yeah, that's where I'm going to end for today, and we'll be back in a couple of days. All right, so here we are. It is Saturday morning, D-Day. Have to have this done today, as the new owner of this engine is going to be here tomorrow morning to come pick it up. So where I'm at right now, I basically have the 4 coolant lines to disconnect, fuel lines to disconnect, AC lines to disconnect, the front engine mount bracket off the transmission, remove the clutch slave cylinder. On the driver's side, remove the locating bracket from the mount, and then the ground strap that's underneath it, I believe. And then it's pretty much drop the cross member and get this thing out of here. So hoping I can get this knocked out pretty quickly. Since the last segment, all I've done is I dropped down the nose of the car a little bit on the jack stands. Right now, the steel grate in the back is about 27.5 inches off the ground. From what I can tell, I need about 30 inches. You can see the roller cart under there that I have. I might need more with that cart. It might be a little higher than what some others use. I'll cross that bridge when I get there. So yeah, so that's where I'm at. I am going to get started in removing those few things off the front of the engine, the mount plates and whatnot, get the clutch slave removed, and start disconnecting lines. All right, update time. Got all the plates off the left side mount. All that's left is the through bolt. Coolant lines are all disconnected from the chassis. They're all loose. Both fuel lines are disconnected. Both AC lines are disconnected. The clutch slave bracket is removed. It's dangling down there. You can probably see it. So yeah, I think all that's left now is the cross member. Get that removed, and then loosen up the 2 side mount through bolts, and then get a cherry picker hooked up to this thing and start dropping it. All right, update time. Everything is disconnected. The cross member is out. As you can see, it's sitting right here. I've got the back up in the air. I have 31.5 inches from the ground to the bottom of the steel grate at the back, so that should hopefully be enough clearance to roll everything out. Cherry picker is opened up. I just need to hook up the lines to it. I've loosened up both side mounts, so those should be easy to just pull the through pins out. So yeah, ready to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this engine strapped up to the cherry picker and start dropping it down. All right, well, after a little battle, the engine is out. It was a little bit more of a job than I expected it to be. Ran into a few things. As an FYI, for those who are going to be doing this in the future, be very careful of the bracket with the slave cylinder and the 2 cables for the shifter. It's very tight to try and drop this with those in between there. I had to do some ups and downs and pivoting of the engine to try and get them up around the turbo and the heat shield to get the engine past them. So something to watch very carefully when you're doing the swap. Also, just one thing of note, when I was talking about the brackets with the wiring, when I originally started disconnecting everything, the bracket right here that has the fuel pump relay and the transistors or capacitors or whatever they are, this has 2 wires that do go to the body harness. One goes to the fuel pump relay, and then one goes to this plug here. You will need to, or I'm gonna need to keep those parts and plug them back into my chassis harness. So when this swap is done, you'll need to reuse whatever is on your car as far as parts go. So just a heads up there. Other than that, it was pretty straightforward. Ran into a little issue. You know, my garage, whoever built this and designed it decided to put a drain right there. So I had a little bit of an issue with the one wheel of the cherry picker popping the drain thing out and falling into it. Thankfully, it didn't, cause too much damage, or didn't cause any damage, or, too much of a pain. Just had to put that plate and do a little wrestling. I was able to get it back out, but made it a little interesting. The furniture cart that I'm using down there, it worked okay for the swap. It's probably maybe a little small. Again, had to, put it on that plate down there. And then, of course, I had to be very, very careful that the engine didn't tip over when it was angled coming off of there. I had to put a jack under the transmission just to try and make sure everything stayed level and nothing fell over on me. Had just enough clearance to get it out from under the back of the car. So like I said, I had 31.5 inches, I think, between the bottom of the grate and the ground. It just cleared rolling it out. So that's and that's with this cart, which is a little taller. So if you have a shorter cart, you'll probably be able to go for the lower height. I just cleared it. I got really lucky. So as you can see, it's now hooked up to the cherry picker here behind the car. I'm gonna go take a lunch break because I'm hungry and it's that time and I need to take a little break. And then I will come back out and pull the transmission off, and this thing will be pretty much ready to go to its new home. All right, getting back to work after a little break. You can see here I pulled the intercooler out. This is the MR2 Heaven side mount that was mounted in the car. That's now out. And starting to move things around, clean up, give myself some space so I can start pulling the transmission off of the engine. I have to clean up a little bit of coolant that spilled. And here you can see no more intercooler in the side. And everything in the engine bay is looking pretty good. So I'm gonna go over the engine, make sure everything looks like it's where it's supposed to be, no casualties from pulling it out, and then start pulling the gearbox off. All right, and before I forgot, I wanted to pull off that capacitor or whatever it is, and then the relay for the fuel pump. So I pulled those off of this bracket here. That bolt right there is where the fuel pump relay mounts to off of your car. That bolt there is where the capacitor for the fuel pump relay, bracket bolts to it. So those were pulled off. In doing that, I noticed what looks like something that might have gotten pulled out of its socket. So I need to take a look at the wiring on here and see what may have gotten snagged on something. All right, I've been going through old video footage and whatnot that, from doing the disassembly on this. And basically, this part was the closest to that thing, which was mounted up on the firewall. So this was pretty much right here. This would have been right here. Looking at these wires, they were in the sheath, which I have this little section of sheathing here that was basically taped to this. But I don't think they were connected to anything ever. I think it was just basically draped down. It's part of what looks to be like in the EGR system solenoid. I'm guessing that's what it is. But I even kind of cut into this sheathing a little bit further down to see if I could find those wires anywhere in this harness. They're not in here. I think that was maybe something that was on the donor car for this engine or whatnot, but was not installed properly when this was put into the car by the prior owner of this car. That's all I can think of. So I'm going to leave it as is because I can't find anything that it connects to. And I don't see how, it hooks up to anything. There's no wires that I can find to match up to it. And those actually look like more of a snip looking at the end of the wires versus a tear or anything like that. So I think those were cut, just left in the sheathing and kind of tucked away and never hooked up to anything. So I am going to make the call to leave it as is. But at least it's documented here where I think they came from in case down the road the new owner of this engine wants to do something about them. All right, took a little bit of wrestling, but here we are. Transmission is off, starter and the side mount and brackets and braces are out. Pulled out the intermediate shaft for the passenger side that's sitting over there, leaning up against the engine stand. So yeah, good to go. All I have to do is take the adapter off the oil filter housing for my gauges that I have and then spin the oil filter back on. and this engine is ready to go to its new home. Been a fun-filled day, so I'm going to knock that out real quick, do a little bit of cleaning up, and call it a day. So with that, I think I am going to call it a video. That's kind of my overview of getting the transmission out of one of these, or getting the engine and transmission out of one of these cars. Definitely different than your traditional front engine rear drive. I've done plenty of those. This was a little more involved, but actually was not as bad as I expected. It came apart a little bit easier than I thought. So yeah, that being said, if you have an MR2 and are looking to do this swap or any kind of engine swap, I wouldn't be afraid of it. It's definitely different, but it's doable. Like I said, I did this here with a cherry picker, that little cart right there, and some tall jack stands and a tall jack with some blocks of wood. That's what I needed to get it up as high as I needed to get it in the back. I didn't do any of the whole take the rear bumper off and lift the back with a cherry picker. I did make sure to wrap cloth around the cherry picker, just to make sure, because it did rub up against the bumper a little bit, but I wanted to make sure I didn't scratch anything. But other than that, yeah, it was pretty straightforward and no real issues. So that being said, I am going to call this a video. This engine will be going to its new home tomorrow. Next video might be back on the Cobra now that I've got this out, because I'd like to get a couple gauges installed and do a little more interior work on it. We'll see. As far as the MR2 goes, next steps are going to be probably to clean up the engine bay. I think I'm going to paint the engine bay the super red to match the exterior paint that looks beautiful, because if you look at it, you can definitely see it looks pretty dingy in comparison to what's been repainted. I'd like to clean that up, make it look a little better. So I'm probably going to do a little cleanup work in the engine bay before I do anything else. I know I need to cut a hole in the firewall for the new harness. I have, the Paul Woods adapter harness. I need to make a second hole for that for the grommet. So probably do that and then do some paint work and clean up and go from there. So hope you enjoyed what you saw. Hope you're learning something. If you did like what you see, please subscribe, please hit the notification bell. There will definitely be more work coming up on this MR2 here pretty soon to get that beautiful 2GR engine that's been sitting there for a year installed into this beast. Thank you for watching and have a great day.